Hello, members, and good evening. Welcome to you all. My name is Anna Spooner, and I'm from the Tastings and Events team at the Wine Society. Joined this evening behind the scenes by my colleagues Gil and Tim, and then, of course, by our buyer for Greece, Matthew Horsley, who's going to be guiding us through this adventure this evening. Firstly and briefly, I'm going to quickly tell you a few hints and tips on Zoom. However, most of you will have seen at the bottom of my email signature on the event confirmation some longer form information about Zoom. However, the two real key things that you need to know this evening are, if you want to ask a question, please use the Q&A feature. And that is found, depending on your device, either on the bottom or the top, and you can simply hit Q&A and then ask your question there. We'll be managing the questions behind the scenes, and we'll have a little bit of time at the end to quiz Matthew on the nuances of Naoussa. If you do have any technical issues this evening, please email us at tastings@thewinesociety.com. So that was tastings@thewinesociety.com, and either Gil or Tim will pick up your email and give you a hand. So this evening's event was our first ever to offer tasting packs, which many of you have bought. So thank you for your support there. For those of you who don't have packs, fear not. This event is designed so you can enjoy it whether you have wine, whether it's small packs, whether you have a couple of bottles, but also if you've got a cup of tea, so it doesn't really matter. But Matthew is going to talk about 6 of the wines that are in the Greece offer. And that went live over the weekend, and you should, hopefully, most of you, or some of you at least, will have received the initial email launching that offer today. Don't worry, you don't have to take too many frantic notes about product codes or numbers, because at the end of the session tonight, I will be sending around an email, and that will include links to all the wines that Matthew talks about in the order that he talks about them, to try and be sensible and keep things nice and easy. So you don't have to write any complicated Greek words. You can literally write 1, 2, 3, 4, 3 to 6, and we will help you. So now enough from me, because I'm actually dying to escape a rather miserable grey and rainy Essex, and for Matthew to transport us to Greece. I've got my wines at the ready. I've got a pen and paper for taking frantic notes, and Matthew, absolutely thrilled to have you. So cheers.
Hi everyone, cheers, thank you. I hope you're all well. Thank you very much for joining us this evening for an even closer look at Greece. This is, I suppose, episode 3. We've already looked at Greece as a whole. We've looked at some slightly more specific areas, and now we're focusing on just one, and we're tasting some wine along as well. As Anna's mentioned, thank you to all of those who have purchased the pack. It's a great way of tasting 6, still quite, niche styles of wine, which I'm really, really, really excited about. Right, I need to just share my screen very quickly. If I wasn't nervous enough already, I've just seen some of the people who have joined in today, and there's some quite famous names. Sorry. Right, can everybody see my screen? Please, if you can't, shout. If you can see my notes as well, I apologize.
We can see your notes, Matthew.
Oh God.
But that's all right. You can change your speaker view whilst I just let members know. Yes, you please do use the chat if you want to let us know where you are and what you're drinking. If you have got all 6 wines as well, we're hoping to do a poll at the end of the session. So do remember which your favourite wine is, because we're going to ask you a little bit of market research to get things going.
Anna, can you just give me a shout if you can see? Of
course.
Things correctly.
I can see it absolutely perfectly there, Matthew.
Yeah, I can't know.
No trouble at all.
What about now? Is that still the same, or can you see?
You still get the same. Would you like us to share it, Matthew?
No, because I need to be able to see my notes. Give me 1 second.
Okay.
So you can see the notes there?
We can, yeah.
God, good thing I didn't put any rude words or anything. How did I do this earlier? Sorry, everyone. Give me 1 second.
That's all right. David Blake's just said, Annie, you have more glass in your wine than me. I've got the standard sample sizes that we were serving. I often get a bit of abuse. Not abuse. But members often laugh at what I do with the remaining leftovers of my wine. When we had an event on Friday, somebody asked, "What are you going to do with the rest of the 6 bottles?" But I'm very fortunate. I have an other half who helps me out. So he's a bit disappointed tonight because I think I'll be able to finish these myself.
So Anna, sorry, what would you press to do this?
Yes, if you just go exactly as you were, presenter view.
Yeah, but it brings up the notes when I do that.
Nope, you're good now.
So you don't have the notes?
Not now.
Okay,
perfect.
Great. Right,
there we go.
Everybody, sorry.
Lovely, that's all right.
Right, sorry about
Thanks,
that, everyone.
Matthew.
Always a nice bit of technical difficulties to start off with.
It is Monday after all.
It is indeed. So as Anna's already mentioned, our first ever Greek campaign went live over the weekend, which is fantastic. Most of you, well, some of you will have received an email today highlighting it. If you haven't, don't worry, they are being sent in batches over the next kind of few days, but I'm incredibly excited. We've got a number of really wonderful wines, and one of the particular features is a Naoussa mixed 6, where we've got 6 wines, of which, you know, all 6 we are tasting today from 6 different producers, from 6 different kind of terroirs, regions within Naoussa. For those of you who have the wines, brilliant. I really hope you enjoy them. For those that don't worry. I'm going to basically be giving my tasting notes throughout. So, you know, you can trust me. I'll give nice, honest tasting notes of what I think the wine tastes like. And hopefully that will guide you as to, you know, if you do want to make a purchase of any of them, then hopefully what I say today will kind of push you in the right direction as to what might tickle your fancy. Right. Okay. So obviously, just to give you a very quick overview, we all know where Greece is. We don't need to look at this properly, do we? Let's all just crack on. But most importantly, if you can see my kind of mouse here, I think I've got like a laser thing, which is quite cool. We're basically going to be zooming into here, into Macedonia, into the north, about 60 kilometers west of Thessaloniki. Which is the major city up there. So if you ever fly into northern Greece, then you will probably fly into Thessaloniki. There we are. As I mentioned, about 60 kilometers west, you've got Naoussa, which is not only the town, but also the PDO, which is famous for the xinomavro grape, which is the 100% varietal for all PDO Naoussa wines. Just to give a bit of an overview about this area as a whole, Greece is the 3rd most mountainous country in Europe, believe it or not. And you can probably see this kind of arch of mountains going around kind of the western side of Naoussa. And then you've got Mount Vermio just to the south. These mountains are hugely important for viticulture in Naoussa. Not only do they stop the pretty brutal winds coming in from the north, but also they provide rainwater from streams and also melting of the snow caps on top. You can ski throughout a lot of the year, actually, in this area of Greece if you're a keen skier. As well as wine lover. So hugely important. And as you can see just to the east, we've got this kind of huge Macedonian plain. This is where a lot of the crops are grown, and you see this kind of big mouth out into the ocean. This kind of sucks in the cool air from the Mediterranean. And also you tend to get quite a lot of fog in this area. So these are really fertile plains here. It's believed to be where King Midas had his gardens. But if you go a little bit further west, you find Naoussa, which is in the foothills of the mountains. And as you start to climb up the mountainsides, you tend to get more viticulture. And it's where, you know, I think some of the world's most underappreciated wines are made. But hopefully this can shed some light on them. The soils primarily in Naoussa are limestone and clay, a bit like Burgundy, which helps. But I'll give a little bit more information on each wine because they're each from a different area. This really is still kind of an area of discovery, and so information is not easy to come by, but I think we've got enough to give everybody an idea. So if we zoom in a little bit more, you can start to see places, names of places which are influential in the Naoussa PDO. So the idea is that we're going to taste from 6 different areas. And believe it or not, the first one we're going to start with is Fitia, which is way down here in the south. Fitia is, as I'll come to in a minute, the highest altitude area. That's where Thimiopolis has a lot of his vines. But you can see the town of Naoussa there, just in the middle. And then you have a slightly better view of some of the mountains just to the west-hand side. So the kind of PDO area is pretty much from Fitia here in the south to an area called Polanera, which is around here where my cursor is, if hopefully you can see that, just to the northeast of Yanakohori. Right. I thought it'd be important to say a little bit about the grape xinimavro, because obviously it is the most important part of the Naoussa PDO. Apologies to anyone who's watched my previous Zooms, because this is the same slide from that. But so xinimavro, obviously it's a black-skinned grape, but it's seen as very much a diva of the grape growing world. So it's extremely vigorous, so lots of leaves, lots of growth, and yields need to be restricted quite substantially in order to get wines which gain a phenolic ripeness so that they don't taste green or woody or stalky. The grapes are very sensitive to downy and powdery mildew. They're very susceptible to botrytis. They're very, very low in anthocyanins. So they're typically, the wines are very pale in color. They suffer from potassium deficiencies. And so typically that manifests itself as very high acidities. They are very, very tannic in nature. The wines are very, very tannic, as you will see with some of these wines. But it does make, well, it can make very ethereal, very aromatic, very sensuous yet structured red wines. And I think hopefully what we can see today is that there is a school of thought a little bit, I suppose a little bit like Rioja in kind of a modern versus traditional sense. The traditional wines, which are kind of the last 3 that we'll be tasting, are slightly paler, slightly more acidic, more tannic. There's less oak influence. They're slightly paler in color, whereas the more modern styles are typically macerated for longer. They're a lot richer. They're a lot riper. They're a lot sweeter, and they typically spend a little bit longer in oak, of which normally a large percentage is new. Typically, people are using French oak. Some use Hungarian, as we will see in a minute, and some use small percentages of American, which I think does add quite an interesting extra character to some of these wines. So that gives an overview of the grape. So all the wines we're tasting are 100% xinimavro. That's the most important thing. Right. I know that those of you who got the tasting packs have got this map in front of you. Apologies if you can't see it, if it's not massively zoomed in, but I thought I'd share it on this as well, just to give, I mean, this is almost an exact overlay of the actual Google Maps map that you had just a minute ago. And so in the south there, you've got Fitia, which we've already spoken about. And then just to the northeast, you've got Trilofos. This is actually where Apostolos Thimiopoulos has his winery and has a lot of his vines. And then if you go further up, basically to outside of Naoussa town, you'll see that Dalarna winery is just here, and their vineyards are just around there as well. You go a little bit further up, that's where Currydas is in Gastra. And then a little bit further up, you've got Ramnista, which is where you'll find the likes of Kiryani and Katima Fundi, of which we will both be tasting today. And then to the northwest, a little bit there, you've got Yanakohori, which is where Kiryani are solely based, well, mainly based. That's where a lot of their vineyards are, and that's where their winery is. And then you go all the way up to the north to Polanera here, and that's where Markovitus winery is, just on the west there. So that gives you an overview of where things are. If you need me to go back to that map, just to give a bit of context to some of the wines, then do shout. I'll be more than happy to. But I think
Matthew, when we do go back to them, there's a very small delay on your cursor. So when we go to each wine, would you be able to hover your cursor over a little bit longer, and then I'll shout when we can see your laser?
Yeah, sure. Okay, we'll do that. Sorry about that.
Thank you.
Right, I think it's about time we tried some wine, don't you? Right. Oh, I suppose actually I'll say a word on vintages. As with everywhere, vintages are important, especially when you've got a sole grape variety grown in what is a relatively small area. We'll be tasting wines from 18, 17, 16, and 15. Why we're tasting them in this order, to be honest, I don't quite know. I think I originally planned to taste south to north, but I've seemed to have messed that up completely. So, but I think this is still a fine order. I think it goes, modern to more traditional styles, so it's fine. 2018 typically produced wines that were quite sweetly fruited, quite ripe. The tannins were nice and supple, and typically the wines are slightly higher in alcohol than some of the other vintages. 2017 is an absolutely wonderful vintage. It has a really great combination of power, but also elegance. It's got really concentrated fruit, wonderful tannins that are ripe but structured. So a lot of the wines from 2017 are really based around their tannin structure, and this lovely sweet acidity. Sweet acidity might sound a little bit weird, but I think you might be able to get some kind of sweeter acidity from some of the slightly warmer vintages in this lineup. 2016 is a little bit like 2018, I suppose. It produces wines which were quite plump, quite sweet, quite ripe, but perhaps a little less boisterous and I won't say heavy because that's a little bit mean, but a little less opulent, I suppose, as 18. And then 2015 produced quite light wines, quite pale. Wine number 2 is from 2015, and it's a lot paler than some of the others, and typically lower in alcohol as well. And so they're more fragrant, ethereal, I suppose would be a word to use. Okay, right, wine number 1, if you've got it, fantastic. Hopefully it's in your glass. Hopefully you've had a sniff and maybe you've had a taste already. I'm just pouring some into mine now. I have already tasted all of these just to make sure that they were all okay, and for me they are, which is great. So this is from Apostolos Themiopoulos. Themiopoulos, hopefully you've all had a chance to taste his wines before, or if you haven't, you're at least aware of his wines and will be convinced to try some in the near future. He is a huge favourite amongst Wine Society members. We absolutely love his wines. He's very charismatic, he's very charming, and he really does make wonderful, wonderful wines, and in particular, wines in Naoussa from 100% xinomavro. The family themselves, they've been growing grapes for generations, but Apostolos was the first one in the family to actually start making his own wine. It's going to be quite a common theme amongst a lot of these wines in that they will have started off basically as grape growers, and then in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, the new generation or the younger generation has come in and started to make their own wine, and I think with amazing results, which is incredibly exciting. So rather than shipping off the grapes to big co-ops or made by the larger producers in the area, we get lots of wonderful single estate expressions of this great grape and this lovely region. So in 2005, he made his first wine. He named that wine Earth and Sky, which is still, well, it was his most premium wine until he brought out some single vineyard wines earlier this year, which are very expensive, but they are very, very nice, I must say. But this is this was certainly his most premium wine, and the wine that really he kind of stuck his reputation on. It's I don't quite know why I've managed to put 30% of Trilofos and 30% Fetier. It's supposed to be 70% Trilofos. I apologize. So yeah, 70% of the grapes for this wine come from Trilofos, which is one of the lower altitude wine regions in Naoussa, and then 30% from Fitio, which, as we saw from the map, is further up the mountain towards Mount Vermio. It's a lot higher in altitude. You're talking kind of 450 to 650 meters rather than 150 to 250 for Trilifos. And so you do get this lovely combination of the slightly more structured, cooler fruit from Fitia and the slightly more plush, sexy xinimavro from Trilifos. As mentioned, the soils are predominantly limestone with some clay, which is great. Clay soaks up lots of water, which is important because it hardly ever rains during the growing season in Naoussa. And so a lot of the rain comes in the winter, and so you need to store a lot of water in the soils. A few people use drip irrigation, like Kiryani use drip irrigation, but mostly people will just rely on the water running down from the mountains, certainly in this area where that's not necessarily in short supply. Yeah. And limestone typically gives quite aromatic, quite ethereal wines, but both of them break up quite nicely, and so they allow for good drainage, yet also good aeration of the soils as well, which helps with disease pressure, which is good. 60% of the grapes are destemmed, and it spends 40 days macerating, which, if we compare this to everyone else, is quite a lot longer than everyone else. And so in colour, it's a little bit deeper than some of the other wines that we'll be tasting today. And then it spends 18 months in third use 500 litre French oak. So the more you use oak, of course, the less flavour it's going to impart on the wine. And obviously the larger the barrel, the less contact there is with the wine. And so typically in France, in Burgundy and Bordeaux, you're using 225 litre barriques, which obviously has more than double the contact with the grape than a 500 litre French oak barrel. But 18 months is relatively long in comparison to some of the other wines that we're tasting today. And so there is an oaky influence, but I don't think it's necessarily overpowering of the wine. Right, so I thought I'd do my tasting note, I suppose. So as I mentioned, it's very youthful. 2018, it's only 3 years ago. This wine has only just been released. All of these wines are the latest releases for all of these wineries. And so it kind of gives an idea of how long people like to keep their wine before releasing them. This has just been released in the glass, relatively pale in the grand scheme of things, in the grand scheme of red wines. But when we taste them alongside some of the others, there's a little bit more depth of color, very kind of bright ruby cherry color, very youthful. There's no sign of browning on the rim. And the nose to me is really aromatic and fragrant and it's very sexy, I think, this wine. And although it's very primary fruit dominated, your kind of sweet cherry and plum and some strawberry, kind of crushed strawberry notes, there is some sweet oak coming on underneath that lovely kind of fragrant aromatic violets and spices that you get from the fruit. As mentioned, xinimavro is defined by its acidity and its tannins, but this is quite, it's quite plush. There are tannins there is structure, there is acidity, which definitely is, for me, the kind of the defining thing for this wine. But the tannins are very sweet, they're very supple. They do coat your mouth, but not quite as much as some of the ones coming up. They're more like a little side project for the wine, and they just kind of provide a lovely base for the fruit to shine at this moment. This is a wine that does age really nicely. We have had older vintages on sale in the past, and so I think I've said now to 2027. Personally, I think Apostolos' wines age well, but not as well as some others. They are slightly more for early drinking, and especially in 2018, I think they're really for the next 5 to 6 years, and then I don't know if they'll improve much. That's why I've been relatively conservative. Alcohol on this is 14, which is quite high compared to some of the others, and I think you do get that. You get this kind of warmth and weight and richness and slight sweetness from the alcohol as well. But I think it's a super classy wine. I will say, any questions ask them whilst we're tasting them, because it will just give the wines a little bit more context. And so if there are any questions about the Earth and Sky, Anna, please shout now, and we can go through it.
You answered what I think is the most important one, which was from Samantha, about best now, young, or best to keep, and recommended drinking windows. And then also just about hand harvesting.
Yeah.
Are they all, is it fully hand harvested? You did mention it, but.
Yeah, I don't know. I would guess so. Yeah, he's very hands-on, Apostolos. All of his vineyards are organic and, I believe, biodynamic certified. And so I'd imagine that he would do mainly hand harvesting. And also if you're destemming a lot, then you want to get your hands on them. And so I believe hand harvested.
Lovely. And on the destemming point, obviously we've got 60% destemmed here. Tim Atkins asking if are lots of people using whole bunches?
No, actually. A lot of these wines are destemmed. I imagine that people are a little bit scared about the green character that you can get with whole bunch. And so you tend to see it more, well, I believe you tend to see it more on the more modern styles where they're picking a little bit later, the fruit is a little bit riper, and there's a little bit more kind of phenolic ripeness and stalky ripeness that you can use those whole bunches without imparting a green, harsh character, because these are pretty tannic grapes, and so any excess of harsh or bitterness will be twofold really. But I think it does add a nice light, spicy character and freshness to this wine. And I can't remember which one, we'll get to in a minute. There's another one which does use some whole bunch, and I think you get more of the spice on that, but we'll get to that one in a minute.
Yeah, I'm conscious of time, Matthew, so and greedy, so I'm happy to go on to wine too.
Oh my God, we've done half an hour already, sorry. God, I talk for Britain, don't I? But yes, I would say of all the wines that we're tasting today, I think this is the one that's best now, personally. Good.
And this wine number 2, this one here, yeah. Perfect.
Sorry, no.
I'll pop the link in for members as well.
The Earth and Sky is the best for drinking now.
Oh, okay. The Earth and Sky is lovely.
Right, Markovitus. Sorry, I talk for Britain. Okay, so this is by a winery called Markovitus. They're a pretty small, quite culty winery, which was founded in 1980, but it was then called Chateau Pegasus, which is why you've got the kind of winged horse on the label, and then they changed its name to Markovitus later on. As I mentioned, they're based in Polonera, which is right in the north, and is currently run by Markos Markovitus, who's kind of the youngest son of, I think, Dimitri, but one of the founding fathers. And he trained in Germany, and so he's another one that's kind of grown up in the vines and has fled the nest to learn his art, learn the skills, and then come back and produce their own wine. They only make one label at Markovitus, and this is it. So it's seen as very much like a benchmark of Naoussa and of a more kind of modern style, I suppose. These wines from Markovitus are legendary for their ageability. They age for a very long time. So this is 2015, and in the glass, you would not think that this wine is 6 years old. It's very, very pale. I don't see any sort of development in color. It's still a very kind of light ruby, pale cherry. There may be a light bit of browning, but that's probably just the brown from my desk showing through the wine. And winemaking styles are quite different for this wine compared to the Earth and Sky. So fermentation, 18 days in stainless steel, most importantly, before 3-day settling. Malolactic also takes place in stainless steel, which took 8 months. And then wine is then racked into another stainless steel barrel. It probably shouldn't say barrel, it should more say tank, for 6 months before 12 months in Hungarian oak barrels. And what does Hungarian oak do, you say? It's similar to French oak in a way. It's got quite high levels of a compound called guaiacol. I think that's what it's called, guaiacol, which gives like a smoky character to wines. Often, yeah, like a smoky, spicy character. But the use of stainless steel with this wine is really to promote the super pure, elegant, fruity style. And the nose is definitely that. It's so elegant. It's very red fruited. You're looking at kind of the red currants and cranberries. It's kind of almost, if you want to use a Burgundy lichen, it's a bit like a Chambolle Musigny on the nose. It's that very crushed strawberry, raspberry, ethereal character. But the palate for me is quite different. Oh, let's have a taste. I think that you start to see the xinimavro tannins on this wine. It is fiercely tannic, but not in an out of kilter way. The tannins really coat your mouth, and they're very, very fine. They're like dust, like really dusty tannins, but not dry in any way. And this is 6 years old, but it's still super youthful. It's still quite primary. There's a little bit of spice, but this wine has got a long way to go, a really long way to go. And the alcohol is 12.5, and so you compare that to 14% for the Earth and Sky. This is a very different kettle of fish, and this is very light and elegant and structured, and I think it's really very nice. So yeah, I've said now to 2030, which again is horribly conservative. I'm sure it will go way past that, but we're famously conservative at the Wine Society because I just don't know. I've not tried really old vintages of this wine, and so I think this will be wonderful for the next 9 years. I'm sure it will go longer, but that's how I go. But I think this is really nice. Good. Right, let's move on. Right. So we're now, if you think that Trilofos and Fitio were in the south, Polinera way in the north, this is just further south than Polinera. So we're still just north of the town itself. And this is a winery called Kiryani. So it was founded by Yanis Boutaris, who was a member of the kind of Boutaris dynasty, I suppose you could call it that, on Santorini. Very, very famous family. So I can't seem to open this. I'm too strong. I've tied it on too tightly. But Greek wine really owes Yanni a pretty big debt, to be honest. But he's not short of controversy. And so he was part of, oh my God, I really can't open this anymore. He was influential in encouraging people on Santorini to stop growing grapes and selling to co-ops or even to the Boutari group and start making their own wine. If I can't get into this, I'll be really upset because it's really nice. And he also bought a vineyard in Naoussa, in Yanakahori, back in the 60s, I believe. And his father basically nearly disowned him and said, what the hell are you doing? Basically, we're grape growers, we're not winemakers. And about 30 years later, in the 90s, he probably finally got tired of his dad telling him what he can and can't do and decided to leave the family business and go, didn't take anything with him, even I think pretty much disbanded the Boutari name. But he asked for one thing, which was his wine, which was his vineyard in Naoussa, which is the vineyard that they still have today. And they are one of Greece's top estates. Oh, I can't open that. Oh my God, how embarrassing. But yeah, it's one of the most famous estates in Greece at the moment, and it's run by Yanis' son, Stelios, who I believe is still the mayor of Thessaloniki, which is quite cool. And yeah, this gives us an idea of 2017, or it would if you could get into the bottle. But thankfully I made notes earlier. So we're back up into the slightly richer, boozier territory. So this is 14.5%. It's deeper in color than some of the others. There's lots more extraction. They use quite regular pigeage for greater extraction, which is kind of the pumping down of the cap in the fermenter. And the Ramnister vines are between 280 and 330 meters, so relatively high in altitude, which give, well, the wines, especially in 2017, give wines of good structure, but really great fruit weight as well. I cannot get into this at all. I really,
Well, I've luckily got into mine, Matthew, and I have to say the nose is completely different. I know you wrote your notes earlier, but
Yeah.
it's immediately the fruit was different. So it was much blacker, dark cherries, those sorts of things. For me, it's.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, you're in.
I'm in.
I mean, it's the aroma is just much more of that plum cherry. We've moved away from the cranberry now.
Yep. Yeah. It smells richer, doesn't it? There's a lot riper fruit. It's more kind of the blackberries and brambly notes. And I think you start getting a lot more of the oak on this as well. So it spends 16 months in 225 litre French and American oak for 80%, with 500 litre casks for the remainder. That's still French and American combination. And you do start to get that slightly sweeter spice, almost slightly vanilla-y, but I know people often get put off by the vanilla character, but it's very, very subtle in this. It's almost like a kind of creamy vanilla pod, not like your kind of fake vanilla that you get in cheap ice cream. It's much fuller on the palate. Tannins are a lot bigger. They're a lot riper. They're a bit more boisterous. Alcohol is definitely warming, and it's definitely a part of the wine rather than a kind of a little side bit. But it's a much richer, very modern expression of xinimavro, and I think that is really good. And annoyingly, I tasted these wines about an hour ago. I'd had them out of the fridge for about an hour, and it was perfect temperature earlier, about an hour ago. But probably having my big, sweaty, hot hands around it, trying to open the screw cap for the last 5 minutes haven't helped it. But I would serve all of these wines slightly chilled, kind of cellar cool, as they say, that around 18 degrees would be great, because now it's just a little bit warm, which makes the fruit a little bit hot, but it's a genuinely elegant wine still. It's just a richer, fuller expression, I suppose. Great. So that's Kiryani. Sorry, I feel like I'm racing through now. So I think that those three for me are the more modern styles, and so we're now getting into more traditional territory where you're spending a bit longer in oak, longer in bottle as well, and these are more savoury wines, and they are very tannic. So the first wine is from a winery called Fundi. This is also Ramnista, where Kiryani was from. And they are very much a bastion for very traditional xinimavro. I brought this wine in about 6 months ago because I wanted to get the absolute antithesis of Apostolos Themiopoulos's Jeune Vin, which was unoaked, super fruity, super clean, and then have something which was way more traditional, way more tannic, way more savoury, a lot longer oak aging, and was a very traditional expression of the grape, just to see if members like it. And I think people have really enjoyed it so far. It's a totally different style, but you'll see. So 25 days maceration, 12 days malolactic fermentation, 12 months in French oak, 40% anew and 60% second use. And they aged the wine for 30 months in bottle before release. So obviously it's now had longer than that, but they are deliberately holding the wine back to get those tertiary, savoury aromas and flavours. But this wine will still age for a very long time. The family themselves, they were originally from Eastern Thrace, which is kind of that northeastern bit as you head towards, well, kind of on the borders of Bulgaria as you head towards Turkey. But they fled during the Second Balkan War and ended up in 1914 in Naoussa, where they founded a new settlement and planted vineyards in 1930. But again, like most, they didn't start bottling their own wine until 1990 under the leadership of Nikos Fundis, who is currently running the estate alongside his nephew Dimitri, who studied enology and viticulture at Dijon University in Burgundy. And they now head up Katima Fundi. And yes, this is 2016, which, as I mentioned, does still produce quite rich, quite plump styles. but perhaps not so much as 2018. But in the glass, I think you can start to see some development. There's a little bit of brown around the rim, perhaps. There's certainly a fade, and on the nose, it's definitely. Xinimavro has this kind of sun-dried tomato character. Certainly in the more traditional styles, it's like a very concentrated, very ripe, dried tomato character. This, I think, has it in spades, and you are definitely going towards the more savory rather than fruity expressions. And so you've got lots of spice, you've got lots of that sun-dried tomato. Yeah, you've got some nice cedar. There's almost kind of like a potpourri sort of smell to it. We start to see here, I think, with the traditional styles, the acidity that you get with Naoussa. This is really very, very acidic. It is, it's like the pillar of the wine is the acidity, and then it's kind of wrapped in these very. They're not drying necessarily, but there's lots of tannin. They're very finely grained. They're perhaps less plush than some of the previous ones, so they're less ripe, and so that you do notice them, and they do have a drying character, but they aren't out of kilter, I don't think. But yeah, this is starting to show the more developed side of xinimavro. But again, this will age, really, really rather well. I think I've put now to 2028, and I don't have any worries with that whatsoever. People often compare xinimavro to Pinot Noir or Burgundy, Pinot Noir or Nebbiolo. I think the more traditional styles are definitely more towards Nebbiolo end. This, to me, reminds me of a little bit like a Lamora up in the northwest. It's quite aromatic, it's quite ethereal, it's quite light on the palate, but it's very tannic and very acidic. But I think it's great. It's one that needs food, definitely. I think you're looking at your lambs and your porks and your anything with a bit of fat, so that tannin has got something to cling onto. But I think it's really great, and for $14.95, I think it's really good value, if I'm allowed to say that.
Kate Hawkins has said that it's lovely with barrel-aged feta.
Well, there you go.
So there we go.
You age feta in barrel? I didn't know that. Sounds great.
If members are trying anything with any foods this evening alongside the wines, please do let us know. We will cover food and wine matching towards the end. But yes, if you're having any great pairings, please do share them. Mm-hmm. And Matthew, don't worry about rushing. You're right on track now. So we'd much rather you enjoy it, and I'm sure members would be thrilled to have you a little bit longer and overrun.
Oh God, don't know about that. Okay, great. Yeah, no problem. I'll slow down a bit. Good. Were there any questions about the wines? I feel that I've not left any time for questions.
No, there were a few comments on the aging of that wine in particular. One member had a 2013 recently and said it was delightful and still very youthful. Mm-hmm. And likewise, another member has said really liked it, but they feel it might need longer in the bottle. Yeah. So it's certainly marrying what you've been saying about it really lasting, Matthew.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think that the tannins are quite prominent still. So I think another year or two in bottle would benefit it, definitely. I think that the three that we've tasted so far, they are really delicious now. And you don't necessarily need to age them. I think the Markovitus would benefit from it, but I could drink that now quite happily. But then I love tannin and I love acidity. So, but yeah, this would definitely get more integrated and complex with age, without doubt. Great.
Just on that, sorry, we do have one question. What kind of flavors would you expect to see from these wines after 5, 10, 15 years, etc.? Is there a way that xinimavro develops?
Definitely towards, most red wines get more savory with age, but these really will. That kind of sun-dried tomato-y character will get more to the fore, I imagine, and you'll get more of those kind of dried, pruny characters and a lot more of kind of the tarry, almost Barolo-like spicy characters as well, I guess. I must admit I've not had that many old hardly any really old xinimavros, so it's kind of slight conjecture, guessing, but you know, I think they'll still stay fresh because there's loads of acidity there, but the fruit will just get a little bit more dried and a little bit more savoury.
And then just another question, sorry, Matthew. We have had a question from Rosemary Brown MW asking, why is this wine so much cheaper? And for members who aren't aware, it's $14.95, I think, this one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Great question. Great buying. You know what? I think they're a relatively small winery. We've been buying a lot from them, and so I think they've been really delighted with, you know, the coverage that it's got, and have given us a great price to help it. I don't know of many others, if any other retailers in the UK that are selling it, and so it's I think it's seen as kind of their way into the UK market, which is great. And so yeah.
And just to confirm, that was wine 4. So
Sorry.
If the screen is slightly misleading, I stopped Matthew in his tracks.
No,
so this is the wine we've just been talking about.
Yeah, the Naoussa. Yep. They also have 2 labels. They have 2 different wines, and I think this is their more entry-level wine. But I believe their more premium one has some Cabernet Sauvignon in it, I believe, which I am not interested in, and so I've not tried it or bought it. So this might, you know, is their kind of entry-level wine, which might also explain it. Great. Wine number 5, Currydas. Okay. This it would probably, this with the Fundi would probably be the most traditional of them. Currydas are very well known for incredibly acidic styles, which can seem quite stern in their youth. They also age in oak a lot longer than most people. And so, yeah, they are quite savoury, quite structured, quite firm styles, which do take a long time to open up. So this is 2016, and it's still, you know, it's still a baby. So yeah, but it's a tiny estate. It's in Upper Gastra, which is basically just to the east of Naoussa town, and it's really where the most unforgiving tannic styles are found. But they're a tiny estate, and they've only got about 2.6 hectares. So they are one of the smallest producers in the region, producing around 13,000 bottles. So really not very many. It was founded in 1979 by Konstantinos Currydas, and is currently run by his son Petros, who, oh my God, something's just fallen over, who runs the estate entirely by hand and almost entirely on his own, because they are a tiny estate. And they, as I mentioned, they believe in very long aging, and their wines can be quite challenging in their youth. So they do need time to come around. So I put now to 2031 on this, and I'm sure it will go way longer. But part of me wanted to get some sort of relative consistency, because these were all going into a mixed case with other wines, and so nothing frustrates me more than having a case of wine and half of them need 10 more years and half of them need 5 less years. And so I think the mixed case that these are all featured in, I think they are all great now, but you know, from 2025 probably they would all be at their best, so to say. It's 13.5%, so a little bit lower in alcohol than some of the others, and this is probably the deepest color maybe so far, this and the Kiryani. But very, very savoury on the nose, loads of that sun-dried tomato, kind of rich plums, and kind of a ripe, dried red curranty note. But it smells very concentrated. Like, I love wines that have great concentration, and it's, for me, and for a lot of people, it's a great sign of quality in a wine, is that concentrated fruit character. And I think this is really concentrated. But yeah, like, acidity is, yeah, it's pretty punchy. Very, yeah, it really supports everything. There's loads of tannin, but the tannins are quite rounded. They're not drying and fine like some of the others. They're a little bit more, yeah, rounded and ripe, but do lend great structure as well, and very mouth coating. It's got an almost kind of ferrous irony quality, a bit like kind of pomade does, I suppose, but this is a bit more structured than most pomades. But it does have that irony, bloody, which doesn't sound very nice, but it's quite an interesting little bit as well. And yeah, this is, yeah, again, tiny property, just an interesting wine and another side of Naoussa, I suppose. But this is yeah, I think in my note I mentioned it's kind of, it smells a bit like pomade, but it's definitely more kind of Serralunga in Barolo. It's definitely the acidic, tannic, hefty, hardcore styles of Barolo. I won't spit that again. Right. Any questions on that one?
We do. Jason Rowley has asked why the green harvest, and I'd like to add a little bit to that and say not only why, but what flavors would you expect to taste from that green harvest?
Well, green harvesting is basically stripping of grapes after veraison. And so basically you're reducing your yields, which is very important for xinimavro. Otherwise you get kind of stalky green flavors because it's very vigorous. So basically you're reducing your yield to give more concentrated, riper grapes that remain. And so it's a balancing act, because these guys don't make much wine, 2.6 hectares, and if they're chucking away 1/3 of their potential crop, it's mad. But that's possibly where that concentration comes from, that added richness and depth that you get. And so I wouldn't say that you'd be able to taste that a wine had been green harvested. You certainly wouldn't be able to put that in an MWSA, but I might try it. But yeah, it does tend to lend more concentrated, riper fruit, because if xinimavro struggles to ripen, if in theory, if you do some green harvesting, then the vine can concentrate on ripening fewer grapes or bunches of grapes, and you should, in theory, get a more consistent harvest in terms of ripeness. A lot of people talk about green harvesting in England, but people make grow such few grapes that green harvesting is relatively suicidal, because you struggle to get yield anyway. Okay.
Just had a member asking to confirm the alcoholic strength of that wine, and I believe it's 13.5, isn't it, Matthew?
Yep, 13.5. Yep. Okay. Right. Last but by no means least is Dalarna. I think I've probably put this last. I don't want to do any disservice to any of the wines, but I absolutely love this wine. I think it is, sounds horrible, I think this is Greece's greatest wine. I've said it. And the first thing I did was chuck a case of this in reserves, because I think it is absolutely sensational, and I think will be the wine that is in serious demand in 5-10 years to come, because I think they're a great team and I think the wines are wonderful. So they were founded in 1840, so they're one of the oldest domains as well, and they've basically been a fixture in the region since then, both growing grapes but also making spirit as well, which I've not tried, but hopefully if I get to visit them at some point, then I can try. I think it's called, I'm not even going to try and pronounce it, so I won't even say it, but you can find it on their website. But it's currently run by the 6th generation family member Kostis, who is very, very young, very up and coming, and he trained at Beaune University in viticulture and oenology, and has worked at organic and biodynamic vineyards throughout France and Spain, and has returned to produce the wines for Dalarna. And so these are organic and, I believe, confirmed biodynamic as well. And yeah, 13.5% for this one. We sold their 2017 towards the end of last year, and it went down very, very well. It would be fascinating at some point to do a comparative tasting between this and the 2017, because the 2017 is one of the most tannic wines I've ever tried in my life. It is I think it was just in that stage of its life where it just completely shut down, a bit like Barolo does, kind of 2 or 3 years after it's released. It can just shut down a bit. And I think the 2017 had done, so I'm not going to touch 2017 for another 3 or 4 years probably. But I think 2018, because it's that riper vintage, I think this is so good now, but will age brilliantly. It's so there is a kind of high-toned note to the Dalarna wines. I find when you're talking sun-dried tomatoes and some of the other ones, they are very much the old, shriveled, in oil, kind of very old dried tomatoes. This has got a more of a, I mentioned this the other week and I regret it, but it to me, it smells a bit like McDonald's ketchup, which I know might not be particularly pleasant to some people, but McDonald's ketchup has that like high acidic smell, like very acidic tomato-y smell. And it just gives it wonderful lift and fragrance and sweetness. And oh yeah, I could smell this wine for ages, but I won't because I'm supposed to be talking to you. Don't need this spittoon. It is rich, sweetly fruited, nice balance of savory and sweet, kind of strawberry, cherry, plum, kind of, yeah, and then lovely spice, nice oak as well. It's 6 months in French and Hungarian barrels, and it's a really complementary oaky spice to it. And I think you do get some kind of oaky tannins as well, slightly woody tannins, which give it a bit of structure. But it's a wonderfully rich and warm and opulent style, albeit in quite a traditional manner. And I just think that is sensational. And yeah, if you're thinking of just getting one wine from this offer, just to see if you like Naoussa, if you're new to it, I think this is a really good one to go for, because I think it's got the tannins and acidity of the more traditional styles, but the plush fruit and sweetness of the more modern. So 100% destemmed, as Tim was asking earlier, and fermented in stainless steel, so you get that lovely purity of fruit before being transferred to oak. Nice long maceration period. And yeah, I would love to hear people's thoughts if they do have the tasting pack, because I just think it's really good.
I think we may have had one less good sample in the tasting pack, unfortunately, Matthew. A few members saying that there is a slightly musty smell. Now, I have to be honest, I did get I did get a slight bit of must initially, but mine's actually blown off. So I'm also wondering whether those who are getting that smell, maybe leave it in your glass for another few minutes and give it a good swirl. I think sometimes, particularly with these styles of wine, there can be that sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Sort of Bretty, quite honest smell sometimes as well. Some people saying theirs is absolutely fine, others saying that some has blown off and others not so much. So
mine is absolutely
perfect,
not musty at all, no sign of cork taint or anything like that. However, I will say we did a press tasting not that long ago, and we used sample bottles like this, and there was a cork bottle in that which was very embarrassing. And so I imagine that it wasn't, it's possible there is a corky bottle, in which case we apologize.
Members who bought the packs, let us know if you did get a cork sample. Just send me a little message afterwards. We do apologize. They are checked before they go in, but naturally the process of decanting them will sometimes exacerbate cork taint. But we are having people saying they agree on the tomato ketchup, Matthew.
Great, perfect. That's exactly what you want in your wine note, isn't it? McDonald's tomato ketchup. But if I'm sorry if you have got a dodgy bottle, because I do think that this is the wine that should make people go wow, and if it doesn't, then hopefully you've got a bad bottle, I suppose, because the wine is I think sensational.
Well, do let us know if you did, and we will reply to you tomorrow. Matthew, I have a question on this, because obviously these two last wines were from a relatively similar area in the so just to the east of Naoussa. I believe the Upper Gastra.
Yeah.
was the area. What is it about that area? Is there particular soil that makes it more tannic?
Possibly. So it's chalky clay. Clay typically gives more tannic, structured wines. And so, yeah, the combination of the chalk and the clay probably means that rather than the limestone of some areas, and also this is still quite high altitude because it's on the upper gastra part, that's probably where you're getting the more tannic expressions from. And also there's kind of some woody tannins as well from 2 years in French oak, but I'd imagine it's mainly the clay dominant soils in gastra where you're getting the more tannins from. Would be my guess.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We've also had Tim Atkin ask about foodras because he's interested if anyone's using them.
Ooh, I don't know. Sorry, I can try and find out for you, Tim. But I don't know. Sorry.
But not screamingly, obviously.
No. I've genuinely no idea. Sorry.
I have a couple of other questions, Matthew. It's up to you. I was planning on sort of doing some overview questions, if that's all right.
Yeah, I love overview.
Well, we've had a few. We've had a question about food matching suggestions for xinimavro, and I know that we've talked about this a lot in the past.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got a tastings team suggestion.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I am. Despite spending 3.5 years in the tastings and events team, I am terrible with food and wine suggestions because I like just drinking a bottle on its own with friends. And so, yes, please give a more PC, wonderful food matching, and I'm sure I will agree.
Okay. Well, we certainly think it's very hard to generalize. We've just tasted 6 incredibly different wines. But structurally, the meat for me is lamb, with that high fat content. It's often got some salt, things like rosemary, especially if you've popped some rosemary into the lamb and it's slightly burnt and charred. I find that those charred flavors can really, really bring out the fruitiness of the wines, which is lovely. And so that would be my meat choice. Veggie, I actually like to stick with that smokiness. So things like aubergines done on the barbecue, courgette fleur done on the barbecue, super easy. I don't think you need to overcomplicate food and wine pairing with xinimavro because the wine does a lot of singing, and I think if you try and put too many flavors with the food, it can be a bit chaotic. So I much prefer a sort of more simplistic meats and vegetables on the barbecue type thing. We obviously had the feta pairing earlier, which is probably a slightly more traditional pairing, which sounds delicious. And I think probably it would really do well with some hard cheeses. So whichever your choice might be. I haven't tried it with Telaggio, but I do love, and it's not to everyone's taste, but I do love Barolo and Telaggio, the soft, very salty washed rind cheese. And I think I have never tried it, but if a member has, please say, but that would be a really good one for me as well. Just that salt and the creaminess as well with the acidity. It's an unusual cheese, but if a member has tried it, then I'd be keen to know.
Perfect. I couldn't have given a better answer. So something with fat or kind of an oiliness for the tannins and the acidity to cut through would be perfect. Or tomato-based stuff, as we've said. Tomato is a big thing, especially maybe not necessarily these ones, but some of the younger, like the Apostolos's Jeune Vin, or we've just released his kind of Naoussa 2018, which was the follow-on from the Bin series wine, which was very popular last year. Those are very good with kind of tomato-based wine foods. Yeah,
and pasta dishes with Parmesan as well. So if you're having a tomato-based pasta dish, trying something like that with these wines, that salty flavour of Parmesan really goes well again. You can sort of treat it a little bit like a Barolo in a way, and the food pairings can be quite similar.
Yeah, I would.
So that was one of my original generic questions, Matthew. I'm going to go on to another, which is from Andy. We'll just squeeze in a couple more if it's all right. What is the oldest xinimavro that you have tried, Matthew?
Oh, I'm going to be outed as a phony here. I've genuinely not tasted any because I've not been able to go out to Greece at all, obviously, since taking over buying in March last year. And so 2015. I know, how can I claim to be an expert if I've not tasted older ones? I know I've heard tales of all xinimavro, but I'm unfortunately I've not had a chance to really taste some old ones. But hopefully when I get to go out there, I will be able to. But yeah, sorry
Lovely.
everyone, I'm a phony.
Well, we've had I find it really lovely that we get to have those older examples anyway. I think it's lovely that we can sell such an array of vintages of the last 5 years worth of Greek wines.
Yeah.
So well done to you, Matthew.
I think, were we doing more questions? We were doing a poll, weren't we?
We were going to do a poll, yes. I think before everyone sneaks off to go and have their dinner, hopefully lamb, we have got, which is your favourite wine of the night? And I believe they're in the right order. Yes, they are. So that's good. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. I actually am going to also vote myself. Are you voting, Matthew?
It says I can't.
Oh, you're a panelist. We know what your vote would be, though. You weren't exactly very very sly or subtle about it, were you?
Definitely the Dalarna. Yeah.
Wonderful. So we should be able to get the results of the poll now. Fingers crossed. We've got a few people writing in the chat as well. 6 was favourite, 3, 6. I'm glad there were some people that got good examples of 6 as well. We do apologise about that. And the poll share, 6 was the winner. So there we go, with 23%.
But scorers for everyone, which is good.
Very true, indeed. Yeah. Yes, so scores for everyone. I think the range this evening, Matthew, has actually really, really shocked me in the most pleasant way. So I've really enjoyed it. It's been such a great diversity of wines. But yes, I'd like to thank you, Matthew, for taking the time this evening. Thank you to members for joining us. It's been really insightful, and Matthew's done an incredible job with the range of Greek wines here at the Wine Society. And in particular, as he mentioned, this is our 3rd Greek event. And if you haven't seen the others, I do encourage you. You can learn about Crete, Santorini. This is our deepest dive so far, but I really hope that Matthew will deep dive into some other Greek regions for us in the future. But if you would like to watch those, I will send them alongside the link tomorrow. And I'll also send members who weren't able to get a map in the post, they can also get a PDF of that map as well. So thank you, Matthew. A huge cheers.
No problem.
And we'll be nicking your time again very shortly.
Can't wait. One thing I'm doing one next week, aren't I?
Yes, I'm off. You are doing one with Tim. But yes, thank you all very much. And we hope to see you again soon.
Thanks, everyone. Pleasure.